I never thought I'd find myself in this position, but here I am, watching my world unravel because of a decision I made out of love for my sister. Her name's Katie, and we've always had a complicated relationship. Growing up, she was the wild one, always getting herself into trouble, and I was the responsible one, trying to fix things and keep everything together. She would burn through money like it was nothing and always had some excuse for why she couldn't pay bills or settle her debts. I tried to help whenever I could, but after a while, I knew I had to step in if things were ever going to change for her. When she called me one night, sobbing about being on the brink of eviction, I couldn't say no. I was doing well in my job, and I had the money to help her. The thought of her struggling alone broke my heart. I transferred enough to cover her rent, her utilities, and even a few medical bills. I wiped out her debt, all of it, and told her it was fine, that I would just handle it. But something about that moment made me feel like I was only enabling her, even though I didn't want to admit it. Then, there was the car. She was driving an old beat-up sedan that barely ran. I had recently upgraded my car and figured I could lend her mine for a while. I thought maybe having a decent vehicle would give her a chance to get a better job or at least get to work without the hassle of public transport. I trusted her enough to let her use my car, my pride and joy, my only luxury. I even paid for the insurance, making sure it was fully covered. The way she thanked me, with tears in her eyes, made me think I was doing the right thing. But as always, Katie had a knack for letting me down. 3 weeks later, I got the call. I wrecked your car, she said, barely able to speak through the panic in her voice. I didn't believe it at first. I rushed over, hoping it wasn't as bad as she made it sound. When I got to the scene, I saw it, my car, smashed up beyond recognition, the front end crumpled like a soda can. She was sitting on the curb, her hands shaking. "I'm so sorry," she kept repeating, but her apology felt empty. I didn't even know how to respond. All I could think about was how I had worked so hard for everything I had, and now it was all gone. I didn't know what to do next. Part of me wanted to yell, to scream at her for being so careless, for taking my generosity for granted. But another part of me understood. She wasn't malicious, just irresponsible. That night, I stayed with her, helping her sort through the aftermath, dealing with insurance, and trying to figure out how to fix everything. But I couldn't ignore the sinking feeling in my gut. It wasn't just about the car. It wasn't even about the money. It was the fact that no matter how much I gave her, she would never be able to stand on her own 2 feet. I'm still trying to process all of this, but I can't help but feel like I've been played. Not by her, she's family, but by my own misplaced sense of responsibility. I've always been the one to clean up the messes, to sacrifice, to do what needed to be done. But now I'm asking myself if it was worth it. Should I have kept my distance? Should I have let her face the consequences of her actions? Or was this just another chapter in a pattern I've been following my whole life, fixing things I can't truly fix? At the end of the day, I don't think she truly understands the weight of what she's done. I don't know if she ever will. I'm not sure where we go from here. All I know is that I've given so much, and now it feels like it's all crumbling. The aftermath of the accident lingered like a dark cloud. The insurance covered part of the damages, but there was still a deductible that I had to pay. I didn't have a choice. I had to fix the mess. It felt like every time I tried to take a step forward, something or someone would drag me back. I knew I was being taken for granted, but I couldn't stop myself. That's just the kind of person I am, always trying to fix things, even when I don't have the energy or the resources left to give. Katie wasn't exactly helpful in the days that followed. She didn't offer to pay me back, didn't ask how I was feeling, didn't even seem all that upset about wrecking my car. She was apologetic, but in a way that felt more like a formality than a genuine realization of the mess she had created. I kept wondering if she even understood the sacrifice I had made for her, or if it was just something she expected me to do because I always had. A week after the wreck, she asked if I could lend her some money for rent again. Her explanation was that she'd been fired from her latest job, something about being late too many times. I wanted to say no, to finally put my foot down and stop enabling her, but I couldn't bring myself to. Every time I looked at her, I saw a version of myself, the one who had no one to rely on, who had to hustle to survive. I wanted to believe that this time, things would be different. That this time, she'd finally get it together. But deep down, I knew I was just fooling myself. It's like there's a part of me that doesn't want to admit that no matter how much I help her, Katie will always fall back into her old habits. Maybe it's because I see the potential in her, the version of herself that she could be if she just tried harder. But she hasn't tried. She never does. I talked to my therapist about it, about why I kept putting myself in this position. She told me that I might be subconsciously trying to fix something from my past, trying to rewrite a narrative that was never really mine to change. That hit me harder than I expected. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that I wasn't just helping Katie because she needed it. I was helping her because I thought I could save her from the mistakes I couldn't save myself from making. It wasn't just about the bills, the car, or the money, it was about the fact that I couldn't fix her. No matter how much I gave, no matter how much I sacrificed, she was always going to be the same. I was tired of carrying her weight. I was tired of being the one who always had to pick up the pieces. I tried talking to her again. I told her I couldn't keep doing this, that I was done helping her out of every mess she created. For once, I needed her to take responsibility. I needed her to learn that actions have consequences. I wanted her to understand that I wasn't some endless resource. But when I said those words, I saw the look on her face, like I had just taken away the one thing she could always count on. Katie was angry, hurt even. She said I was being selfish, that I didn't care about her anymore. But deep down, I knew that if I kept going down this path, I'd end up resenting her. And I didn't want that. I didn't want to look at my sister and see nothing but frustration and bitterness. But that's where I was heading. I walked away from that conversation feeling more conflicted than ever. I felt like I had done the right thing, but at the same time, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had just lost her. And maybe, just maybe, I was losing myself in the process too. The days after that conversation felt like a blur. I kept replaying it in my head, wondering if I had been too harsh, too cold. But as the hours passed, the guilt started to fade, replaced by a strange sense of relief. It was as though a weight had been lifted, and I was able to breathe for the first time in what felt like years. I wasn't her fixer anymore. I wasn't responsible for every bad decision she made. But that didn't make it any easier. Katie avoided me after that. She didn't text, didn't call, didn't even respond to my messages. Part of me knew she needed space to process what had happened, but the other part of me felt like I was losing her, and I hated it. I wanted her to understand why I had to make that choice. I wanted her to see that I wasn't abandoning her, I was trying to make her face the reality of her actions. It took a week before she reached out again, and when she did, I could hear the hurt in her voice. She apologized, this time, it felt different. It wasn't the usual "I'm sorry" without any real understanding behind it. She admitted that she had been reckless, that she had let me down, and that she was ready to change. But I had heard that before. And I knew that talk was cheap. Still, I agreed to meet her. I didn't know what else to do. When I saw her, she looked different, softer, almost vulnerable. She didn't look like the same person who had borrowed my car without a second thought, the same person who had squandered every opportunity I'd given her. We sat down at a coffee shop, and she told me about the new job she had started. She said she had been working hard to keep herself out of trouble, to prove that she could stand on her own. I wanted to believe her, I really did, but a part of me knew that this was just another chapter in a never-ending cycle. "You don't have to fix everything for me," she said quietly, her hands wrapped around her coffee cup. "I know I've messed up, and I know I've taken you for granted. But I want to try. I really do." It was the first time she had ever said that. For the first time, I saw a glimpse of the person she could be. I felt that familiar pull, that desire to help, to do whatever it took to make things right for her. But I also knew I had to protect myself. I couldn't go back to being her crutch. I couldn't let her use me to avoid facing the consequences of her actions. "I'm proud of you for starting this new job," I said, keeping my voice calm. "But you need to keep going. This can't just be another cycle of promises and disappointment. You have to show me, and more importantly, show yourself, that you can do this on your own." Katie nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. "I know. And I will. I'm not asking for your help anymore. I just want you to believe in me." It was a quiet, painful moment, one that held the weight of everything we had been through. I wanted to believe her, but I knew I couldn't do it for her. It was her turn to step up, to make the changes she had been avoiding. It was her turn to fight for herself, without me swooping in to save the day. As we sat there, in the silence that followed, I realized something important. For the first time in years, I wasn't just trying to fix her problems. I was letting her face them. And maybe, just maybe, that was the best thing I could do for her. Katie left that day with a promise to take responsibility, to finally grow up. I didn't know if she'd keep it. But for the first time, I didn't feel the need to carry her. I could finally let go. The road ahead is uncertain, and I'm not sure where we stand. But for the first time, I'm not the one holding everything together. Maybe that's what both of us need: space, distance, and the chance to find our own way. Weeks passed, and things between Katie and me stayed quiet. There were no grand gestures, no immediate signs that she had truly turned things around. But there was something different in the air, something that I couldn't quite put my finger on. I noticed she was paying her bills on time, something I never thought I'd see. She even started sending me little texts here and there, updating me on her progress, but nothing too overbearing. The updates weren't filled with excuses or empty promises. They were simple facts. And for the first time, it felt like she was taking ownership of her life. It wasn't easy for me to watch from a distance. There were days when I wanted to call her, to make sure she was still on track, to make sure she wasn't slipping back into her old habits. But every time I felt that urge, I stopped myself. I realized that if I kept trying to control everything, I'd be doing the same thing I had always done, robbing her of the chance to take real responsibility. So, I did nothing. I kept my distance, let her figure things out on her own. One night, a few months after the wreck, she called me. I had almost forgotten what her voice sounded like when it wasn't frantic or filled with panic. "I got a raise," she said. "A real one. And I finally saved up enough to pay for my own insurance, and I wanted to pay you back for the car stuff." My heart skipped a beat. I hadn't expected this. Not this soon. Not after everything that had happened. "I'm not asking you to pay me back, Katie," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "What I want is for you to keep moving forward, to keep making those changes. That's all I've ever wanted." She paused, and for a moment there was silence on the other end. I know. I wanted to show you that I'm not the same person I was. I felt something inside me shift, something I hadn't realized I was holding on to. The burden I had carried for so long, the need to fix everything, started to loosen its grip. Maybe she had changed. Maybe this was her turning point. Or maybe it was just a phase, and the cycle would start again. I wasn't sure. But at that moment, I realized something important. I didn't have to carry the weight of her mistakes anymore. "Just keep going, Katie," I said, my voice softer than I expected. "That's all I can ask for." The conversation ended with her thanking me again, but this time, it wasn't followed by the usual guilt or obligation. It felt like we had finally reached some kind of understanding, even if it wasn't perfect. Even if it wasn't the resolution I had hoped for. It was enough. Over the next few months, things between us became quieter, less strained. Katie still made mistakes, and there were times when I wanted to step in, to fix things for her. But I didn't. And I didn't feel that familiar weight of frustration that I used to feel when she let me down. It was like I had learned how to let go, how to trust her, even when I wasn't sure she could handle everything on her own. Then, one day, I received a small package in the mail. It was from Katie. Inside was a keychain, simple, but with the words, "Thank you for letting me grow," etched into it. I held it in my hand, staring at it for a long time, and for the first time in a long while, I smiled. Maybe she wasn't perfect. Maybe she would still make mistakes. But she had grown. And that was all I had ever wanted for her. The road ahead would be long, and there would still be bumps along the way. But for the first time, I could say with confidence that Katie wasn't my responsibility anymore. She was her own person, and I could finally let go. And maybe, just maybe, we'd both be okay. It's been a few more months since that keychain arrived in the mail. Katie and I don't talk as often as we used to, but when we do, there's a new kind of peace between us. I've stopped waiting for her to call with another disaster or to ask for help. I've stopped carrying the weight of her mistakes, and honestly, it feels like I've freed myself in ways I didn't expect. A few weeks ago, I ran into her at a local coffee shop. I almost didn't recognize her at first. She looked different. She wasn't the frantic, disheveled version of herself I had known for years. She was calm, collected. She smiled at me when she saw me, and it wasn't the forced smile I used to get when she needed something. It was real. "Hey, you," she said, sitting down at my table. "I got some good news." My heart did that familiar flutter in my chest, the kind it used to do when I thought maybe, just maybe, this time was different. But this time, I wasn't holding my breath. I wasn't waiting for the inevitable letdown. "I've been saving up for a car," she continued. "And I finally have enough for a down payment. I'm getting a used one, nothing fancy, but it's mine. And it's all me." I couldn't help but smile, genuinely this time. It was strange to see her taking ownership of her decisions, making plans that didn't involve me or my help. There was no guilt in her voice, no sense of obligation, just pride. "That's amazing, Katie," I said, my voice steady, but there was an emotion in it I couldn't quite place, something between relief and pride. "You've come a long way." She nodded, looking down at her coffee for a moment before meeting my eyes. "I know I've messed up a lot. And I've taken you for granted. But I want you to know. I don't need you to save me anymore. I'm doing this for me now." That was the moment. The moment I realized that she wasn't just telling me what I wanted to hear, she meant it. She had changed. Not because I had forced it or because I kept stepping in to rescue her, but because she had chosen to. And I couldn't be prouder. We spent the next hour talking about everything and nothing, catching up in ways we hadn't in years. It felt like we were finally just two people, not sister and fixer, not burden and rescuer. Just two people who had shared a past, but who were learning to live separate lives. As we said goodbye, she hugged me tightly. "Thanks," she whispered. "For everything." I nodded, watching her walk away, a new sense of confidence in her stride. I couldn't help but think that maybe, just maybe, we had both learned something. I had learned to let go. And she had learned to stand on her own. There's still uncertainty ahead. I know Katie will make mistakes, and I know there will be times when I'll want to step in. But I also know that she's capable now, capable in ways I never gave her credit for before. And that's all I can ask for. All I can hope for. And maybe, in the end, that's the best gift I could have given her. To believe in her, even when she didn't believe in herself. To trust that, one day, she would find her way. I can finally say, with certainty, that I'm proud of her. And for the first time, I think I can stop looking over my shoulder, waiting for the next disaster to fall. I think we're both okay now. Months have passed since that day at the coffee shop, and things between Katie and me have settled into a new rhythm. We still talk, but it's different now, lighter, more natural. No longer burdened by past mistakes or expectations, I find myself looking at her in a new light. She's doing well, really well, actually. She's sticking to her job, paying her bills, and most importantly, taking responsibility for her actions. It's been a slow climb, but the progress is undeniable. A few weeks ago, she called me to let me know she was moving into a new apartment. Her own place, no help from me. And I can't explain it, but hearing those words felt like a weight lifting off me, a final release. She had done it on her own. No handouts, no promises to pay me back. Just pure, hard-earned independence. I can't believe I'm doing this, she said, excitement and disbelief in her voice. I know I'm not perfect, but I'm proud of myself. I'm proud of you too, I told her, meaning it more than I ever had before. For the first time in a long time, I realized I didn't have to fix everything for her. I didn't have to carry the burden of her mistakes, because she was capable of fixing them herself. I've spent a lot of time reflecting on everything that's happened between us. Our childhood, the messes I tried to clean up, the wrecked car, the debt, all of it. It's been a long road, one that's had its fair share of pain and disappointment. But looking back now, I see something I didn't see before. I see how far we've both come. Not just her, but me, too. I think I've finally accepted that I can't protect her from everything. And maybe, that's been the most important lesson for me. Letting go doesn't mean abandoning someone, it means giving them the space to grow on their own, even if it hurts. And sometimes, you have to step back and let people fall so they can learn how to get back up. Katie's success, her progress, it's not just a reflection of her growth. It's a reflection of mine too. I've learned to stop carrying the weight of other people's mistakes. I've learned that I can't fix everything, no matter how much I want to. And most importantly, I've learned to trust that people can change even if it takes time. Even if it's hard to see at first. A few nights ago, we had dinner together. It was a simple meal, nothing fancy, but it felt meaningful in a way I didn't expect. As we sat there, talking about her new place, her job, her plans, I realized something important. For the first time in years, I wasn't waiting for the other shoe to drop. I wasn't waiting for her to fail, to come crawling back for help. She had finally become the person I always hoped she could be, and I had finally become the person who could let her be that person. I'm really glad we're here, Katie said, as she took a sip of her drink. You know, you've been such a huge part of my life. I don't think I say it enough, but thank you. I smiled, feeling a lump form in my throat. You've always had it in you, Katie. I just needed to stop trying to do it for you. We both sat back, letting the quiet settle between us, not uncomfortable, but content. I didn't need to fix her anymore. And she didn't need me to. We were both learning to stand on our own. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like we were both exactly where we needed to be. It's been almost a year now since I started letting go, and I have to admit, things between Katie and me feel normal. It's the kind of normal I didn't think we'd ever get to. No drama, no crises, just two people, moving through life, imperfect but figuring it out. Katie has her own place, she's been promoted at work, and she's kept that car, still running fine, thankfully. Sometimes, when we talk, I have to remind myself of how far we've come. But there's been something else that's been shifting, something I didn't expect. I've been living my own life more fully. After years of being wrapped up in Katie's mess, I realized how much of my own self I had put on the back burner. My friendships, my goals, my own happiness, they all took a hit while I was busy trying to fix everything for someone else. It was hard to admit, but I had been neglecting myself. Over the last few months, I've started rediscovering things I love, things that had been buried under layers of guilt and responsibility. I've taken up hiking again, something I used to do all the time but had let go of because I always felt like I was too busy. I started getting more involved with my friends, something I didn't even realize I was avoiding before. And honestly, it feels good. No, it feels right. I'm reconnecting with parts of myself I had buried, and I don't think I would have been able to do it if I hadn't let go of the need to fix everything. A few weeks ago, Katie invited me to her new place for dinner. She had been cooking more, learning how to make new dishes, and I could hear the excitement in her voice when she invited me over. It was a small gathering, just the two of us, but it felt like a celebration in its own way. She'd come so far, and I'd come far too. She wasn't asking for help anymore, and I wasn't giving it unless she asked. I wasn't holding my breath for something to go wrong. As we sat down at her kitchen table, laughing over burnt bread and spilled wine, I realized how much our relationship had changed, not just because of what had happened, but because of the way we had both learned to live our own lives, side by side, without constantly depending on each other to survive. You know, Katie said, leaning back in her chair with a smile, I've been thinking a lot about the past lately. About all the things you did for me, and how much you sacrificed. I know I didn't make it easy. I smiled softly, shaking my head. You didn't have to make it easy. You're my sister. But I think you're finally doing it on your own now. And that's all I ever wanted. She looked at me for a moment, her expression soft, before she nodded. I've got a lot of catching up to do. But I think I'm getting there. And I realized, in that moment, how true that was. She was getting there. And so was I. We weren't perfect, but we didn't need to be. We had both learned the most important lesson, to let each other grow. To let each other be. As the evening wound down and we said our goodbyes, something shifted again, this time in the most subtle way. I wasn't waiting for a crisis. I wasn't holding on to old worries. We were both standing on our own 2 feet. I walked away from her place that night with a quiet sense of peace. I had let go of the past. I had let go of the need to be her savior, her fixer, her everything. And for the first time in my life, I felt like I had truly found myself again, not in the way of rescuing others, but in finding the strength to just be. Not just for Katie, but for me. I think we're both finally living the lives we were meant to live, separately, but together in a way that feels like enough. And that's all I ever needed. It's hard to believe how much has changed in such a short time. Katie's doing well, thriving in ways I never imagined when I first started helping her. It's funny how time has a way of putting everything into perspective. I look back at everything, at the debt, the wrecked car, the countless moments of frustration, and I see it all differently now. At the time, it felt like I was drowning under the weight of it all. But now, I see it as part of our journey. Part of the growth that had to happen for both of us. Katie and I don't talk every day anymore, but when we do, it's simple. It's easy. It's the way it should have been all along, and that's something I never thought I'd get to experience with her. I don't feel that familiar knot in my stomach when the phone rings, wondering if it's another emergency. Instead, I look forward to hearing about her new job, her plans, her life. And I share mine, too, no guilt, no hesitation, just 2 people who've both learned to stand on their own. The last time I saw her, we went for a walk through the park, just the 2 of us. No expectations, no strings attached. She talked about the new apartment she had moved into, and how she finally felt like she was creating a life for herself, one that didn't rely on anyone but her. And I told her about my new projects, the trips I was planning, the things I was rediscovering about myself. We didn't talk much about the past. We didn't need to. It was clear we both knew how far we'd come, without having to say it out loud. Before we said goodbye that day, she hugged me tight. "Thanks for believing in me," she whispered. "I don't think I would have gotten here without you." And in that moment, I realized something I hadn't thought about in a while. I had spent so much of my life trying to be the one who fixed everything that I hadn't really seen how much she had fixed herself. I hadn't realized how much strength it took for her to make the decisions she had, to stand up and say, "I can do this on my own." And maybe that was the real gift I had given her, not the money, not the car, not even the help with her bills, but the space to find her own way. I smiled, squeezing her back. I didn't do anything. You did all of it. You just needed to believe you could. And with that, we parted ways, each of us knowing that we were fine. More than fine, actually. We were both stronger than we had ever been, not because of what we'd done for each other, but because of what we had done for ourselves. I haven't needed to step in and fix anything since then. And you know what? I don't think I ever will again. I've learned to step back and let go, to trust that we're both capable of handling what life throws our way. I've finally found peace in that. I've finally learned that sometimes, the best way to love someone is to let them stand on their own. And as much as it hurts sometimes to watch someone you love struggle, I've learned that it's in those moments of struggle that they find their true strength. Katie and I are different now, stronger, freer. We're both living our lives, side by side but not intertwined. And that's more than enough.